The night of August 3, 2025 was quiet in the suburban community of Middleburg, Florida. The air was thick with the late summer humidity, and families were winding down their weekends preparing for the week ahead. But just after midnight, as Monday, August 4th began, a call pierced the calm of the Clay County Emergency Dispatch Center. The voice on the other end was that of a young boy, steady and devoid of the panic one might expect. His words were simple, direct, and utterly horrifying. He told the dispatcher that he had just done something terrible, something irreversible. The boy, it would soon be revealed, was 14-year-old Trevor Lee, and his confession would send a wave of shock through his town and the entire nation. This was not a frantic plea for help or a report from a witness to a crime. This was a confession, delivered with a chilling composure that defied his young age. The dispatcher, trained to handle the most stressful situations, had to process the unbelievable statement, "I just killed my parents." The words hung in the air, a stark and brutal admission. There was no crying, no shouting, just a flat, factual tone that made the message even more disturbing. The call set in motion a chain of events that would uncover a devastating family tragedy, leaving a community to grapple with questions that had no easy answers. How could a child commit such a final act against the very people who brought him into the world? The location from which Trevor Lee made his call was not the scene of the crime. He wasn't standing in his family's home, surrounded by the horror he had created. Instead, he had walked more than a mile through the dark, quiet streets to a local church. This detail adds another layer of complexity to an already bewildering story. The choice of a church, a place of sanctuary and reflection, as the site for his surrender suggests a mind grappling with the enormity of its actions. It was from this place of supposed peace that he reached out to the authorities, ready to face the consequences of the violence he had unleashed just a short time earlier. The initial report sent deputies racing to two separate locations. One team was dispatched to the church to find the boy who had made the call, while another was sent to the family's residence on a quiet street near Silver Point and County Road 220. The officers did not know what they would find at either location. Was this a prank? Was the boy a victim himself, forced to make the call? Or was the story he told, as unbelievable as it sounded, the absolute truth? The unfolding events of that early morning would confirm the worst fears, revealing a scene of domestic violence that ended in the most tragic way imaginable, leaving two parents dead and their young son as the sole suspect. To understand the depth of this tragedy, one must first understand who the victims were. David Lee, aged 44, and Brandy Smith, aged 45, were by all accounts a typical couple living a quiet life in Clay County. They were parents, neighbors, and members of their community. Friends and acquaintances described them as hard-working people who were raising their son, Trevor. Like so many families in the area, they were navigating the challenges of daily life, balancing work, home, and the complexities of parenting a teenager. There were no public signs of severe dysfunction, no prior calls to the police for domestic disturbances that would have placed them on anyone's radar. They were, in essence, the family next door. Trevor Lee, at 14, was at a pivotal and often turbulent stage of life. Adolescence is a time of change, of seeking independence while still needing guidance. Neighbors saw him as a regular kid, someone who might be seen playing outside or helping with chores. There were no immediate red flags that would suggest he was capable of such extreme violence. He was a student, a son, and a member of the community, seemingly no different from his peers. The horror of the crime is magnified by this apparent normalcy. The act he confessed to was so far outside the realm of what anyone who knew him could have imagined, leaving everyone to wonder what was happening behind the closed doors of their home. The family lived in a modest home in Middleburg, a growing suburb of Jacksonville known for its family-friendly atmosphere. It is a place where people move to raise their children, seeking good schools and safe neighborhoods. The Lees were part of this fabric. David and Brandy worked to provide for their son, likely holding the same hopes and dreams for his future as any other parent. They would have celebrated his birthdays, attended his school events, and worried about his grades. The image of this family is one that is relatable to millions, which makes their violent end all the more unsettling for the community and the public at large. The contrast between the family's outward appearance and the brutal reality of what happened is at the heart of this tragedy. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we may never truly know what goes on inside a family's home. The smiles and friendly waves to neighbors can mask deep-seated issues and simmering tensions that remain hidden from view. The Lee family's story is a stark reminder that even in the most ordinary of settings, extraordinary and terrible things can happen. The investigation would soon turn to the question of what could have gone so terribly wrong to shatter this picture of normalcy so completely and irrevocably. The catalyst for this horrific event, according to initial reports from law enforcement, was something tragically common in households everywhere: a family argument. On that Sunday evening, a disagreement erupted between Trevor and his parents. The specific details of what they were arguing about have not been made public, but it was described as a significant conflict. In families with teenagers, arguments are not unusual. They can be about grades, chores, friends, screen time, or 1,000 other minor and major issues. These disputes are a normal part of the push and pull of adolescence, as children test boundaries and parents try to maintain them. However, this particular argument escalated far beyond the realm of normal family conflict. It did not end with a slammed door, a grounded teenager, or a tense dinner. Instead, it festered, growing in intensity until it reached a breaking point. We can only speculate about the words that were exchanged and the emotions that flared in the Lee household that night. Was it a long-simmering issue that finally boiled over, or a sudden explosive confrontation? Whatever the cause, the disagreement created an atmosphere so toxic and volatile that it set the stage for an unimaginable outcome. The anger and resentment from that argument did not dissipate. It transformed into something far more dangerous. It is crucial to consider the emotional state of a 14-year-old in the midst of a heated argument with their parents. A teenager's brain is still developing, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and understanding long-term consequences. In a moment of intense anger or emotional pain, a young person's judgment can become severely impaired. They can feel trapped, misunderstood, and overwhelmed. For most, these feelings lead to outbursts they later regret. But in this case, the emotional turmoil appears to have led Trevor down a path from which there was no return. A path that ended in a permanent and devastating solution to a temporary problem. The argument, therefore, was not just a simple disagreement, it was the spark that lit a fuse. The pressures and conflicts that may have been building under the surface of the family's life likely all came to a head on that Sunday night. Sheriff Michelle Cook would later allude to this, confirming that the killings stemmed from this family dispute. The tragedy lies in the finality of the actions that followed. A conflict that, in any other home, might have been resolved with time and communication, instead spiraled out of control. It became the turning point where a family argument ended not in reconciliation, but in a complete and utter annihilation of the family itself. At some point during or after the argument, the conflict in the Lee home crossed a line from verbal strife to physical violence. Trevor Lee, in a state of mind that investigators are now working tirelessly to understand, made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life and end the lives of his parents. He reportedly gained access to a firearm that was kept in the house. The weapon is believed to have belonged to his parents, David and Brandy. The presence of a gun in the home, combined with the intense emotional volatility of the situation, created a deadly cocktail that would prove to be catastrophic for the entire family. The moments leading up to the shootings are chilling to contemplate. What was Trevor thinking as he located the firearm? Was it an impulsive act, born of a sudden surge of uncontrollable rage, or was it a more calculated decision made after the argument had concluded? These are questions that only Trevor himself can truly answer. The fact remains that he took the weapon and used it against his own parents. He fired the gun, striking both David Lee and Brandy Smith. The sounds of those gunshots would have been the last sounds of the Lee family as it had existed, a brutal and final punctuation mark on their last argument. The act itself represents the ultimate betrayal of the family bond. Parents are meant to be protectors and children are meant to be nurtured and kept safe. The roles were horrifically inverted in that moment. The son became the aggressor, and the parents became the victims inside their own home, the one place they should have been safest. The violence was swift and conclusive. When police later arrived, they would find both David and Brandy deceased from their gunshot wounds. The argument was over, but the silence that followed was filled with a tragedy that would echo far beyond the walls of their house. This act of parricide, the killing of one's parents, is one of society's greatest taboos. It is a crime that is both shocking and profoundly sad, as it speaks to a level of breakdown within a family unit that is difficult for most people to comprehend. For a 14-year-old boy to commit such an act suggests a deep well of pain, anger, or psychological distress. The investigation would need to delve into Trevor's mental health, his relationships at school, and any other factors that could help explain how a family argument could escalate to a double homicide. The unthinkable had happened, and now the process of understanding why had to begin. After the gunshots faded and a terrible silence fell over the Lee home, Trevor Lee did not stay. He did not hide, nor did he attempt to cover up what he had done. Instead, he made another decision, one that was as deliberate and perplexing as his act of violence. He left the house, stepping out into the warm, dark Florida night. He began to walk, leaving behind the scene of the tragedy he had authored. His destination was not random. He walked for over a mile, a significant distance for anyone on foot, especially a young teenager alone in the middle of the night. His solitary journey took him through the quiet, sleeping neighborhoods of Middleburg. One can only imagine what was going through his mind during that long walk. Was he filled with regret, fear, or a strange sense of calm? Did the reality of his actions begin to sink in with each step he took away from his home? Walking can be a meditative act, a time for processing thoughts and emotions. For Trevor, this walk may have been a period of transition, a mental journey from the peak of his rage or despair to a state of resignation. He was moving from the role of aggressor to the role of a person ready to confess and face judgment. The journey itself is a haunting part of the narrative, a quiet interlude between the violent act and the formal surrender. His final destination was a local church. The choice is symbolic and deeply resonant. Churches are seen as places of refuge, confession, and redemption. By walking to a church, was Trevor unconsciously seeking some form of sanctuary or absolution? Or was it simply a public, recognizable landmark from which he could safely contact the authorities? Perhaps it was a combination of both. Whatever the reason, it was on the grounds of this church that he decided to end his brief time as a fugitive. He had created a point of no return at his home, and now he had reached a physical and metaphorical endpoint to his flight. The walk itself highlights the surreal nature of the entire event. It lacks the panic and chaos one might associate with the aftermath of a violent crime. There was no high-speed chase, no desperate attempt to escape. Instead, there was a quiet, lonely walk through the suburbs, culminating in a surrender at a house of worship. This methodical behavior suggests a level of composure that investigators will surely examine closely. It was the action of someone who, for whatever reason, understood that the life he knew was over and was now taking the first steps into a new and honestly terrifying reality, one that would be defined by the events of that single tragic night. Upon reaching the church, Trevor Lee found a telephone and dialed 911. The call, which came into the Clay County Dispatch Center just after midnight, was the first official notification of the tragedy that had unfolded. The dispatcher who answered the phone was met not with hysteria but with a calm, clear voice. It was the voice of a 14-year-old boy, and his message was direct and chilling. "I just killed my parents." There was no ambiguity, no hesitation. He stated it as a fact, a piece of information he needed to convey to the authorities. This detached delivery is, honestly, one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. The 911 dispatcher, trained for emergencies of all kinds, had to quickly assess the credibility of the call. Prank calls are not uncommon, but something about Trevor's tone must have conveyed a grim authenticity. The dispatcher kept him on the line, gathering crucial information while simultaneously dispatching law enforcement to his location. Trevor calmly provided the details they needed. He told them where he was, at the church, and presumably where the crime had occurred, at his family's home. He remained on the phone, waiting as instructed, his composure never breaking. He was, in effect, turning himself in. When Clay County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the church, they found Trevor Lee exactly where he said he would be. He was alone, a solitary figure in the stillness of the night. He offered no resistance. He did not run, fight, or argue. He surrendered to the deputies peacefully and was taken into custody without any incident. His cooperation was absolute. It was as if he had completed a task and was now simply moving on to the next logical step. The ease of his arrest stands in stark contrast to the brutal violence of the crime he had just confessed to committing. The confession and surrender mark a pivotal moment in the timeline of this tragedy. It shows a clear awareness of his actions and a willingness to face the immediate consequences. It was not a crime of passion followed by a desperate flight from justice. Instead, it was a crime followed by a methodical walk and a calm phone call to the police. This behavior raises profound questions about his state of mind. Was this the cold detachment of someone with no remorse, or the resigned exhaustion of a child who had been pushed past his breaking point and saw no other way out? The investigation would now have the difficult task of trying to find the answer. While one team of deputies was taking Trevor Lee into custody at the church, another team was dispatched to the family's home, located near the intersection of Silver Point and County Road 220. They approached the residence with caution, aware of the violent crime that had allegedly taken place inside. As they entered the house, their worst fears were confirmed. The home was not just a crime scene, it was the final tragic setting of a family's complete collapse. The quiet suburban house had been transformed into a place of unimaginable horror and sadness. Inside, officers discovered the bodies of David Lee, 44, and Brandy Smith, 45. They were found deceased, both having suffered fatal gunshot wounds. The scene was a grim testament to the violence that had erupted just hours earlier. The argument that had spiraled out of control had ended here, in the most permanent way possible. For the veteran officers who have seen their share of tragedy, it was still a deeply disturbing sight. A home that should have been a sanctuary had become a tomb for two parents, allegedly at the hands of their own child. The evidence of a terrible struggle or a sudden shocking attack was now there for forensic teams to piece together. The firearm believed to have been used in the killings was recovered at the scene. Investigators confirmed that the gun belonged to the parents, a common situation in many American households. This detail is honestly a somber reminder of the responsibilities that come with gun ownership, especially in a home with children or teenagers. In this case, a weapon intended for protection or sport became the instrument of the family's destruction. The presence of the gun provided a ready and lethal outlet for the anger and despair that filled the house that night, turning a heated conflict into a double homicide. The deputies secured the residence, and the methodical work of a major crime scene investigation began. Detectives and forensic specialists started the painstaking process of collecting evidence, documenting the scene, and trying to reconstruct the final moments of David Lee and Brandy Smith's lives. Every detail, from the location of the bodies to the placement of the shell casings, would be critical in building a case and understanding the sequence of events. The home was no longer a home, it was now Exhibit A in a murder investigation, its silence bearing witness to the terrible tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. With Trevor Lee in custody and the crime scene secured, the formal investigation into the deaths of David and Brandy Lee swung into high gear. Clay County Sheriff Michelle Cook soon addressed the public and the media, confirming the grim details of the case. She laid out the basic facts. A 14-year-old boy had called 911 to confess to killing his parents following a family argument. She confirmed that Trevor had been arrested and was being charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Her statements provided an official framework for a story that was already sending shockwaves through the community. Sheriff Cook made it a point to reassure the public that there was no ongoing threat to the community. This was not a random act of violence, but a contained domestic tragedy. She explained that the authorities believed Trevor Lee had acted alone and that the incident was confined to the family home. This assurance was crucial in calming the fears of neighbors and other residents in Middleburg who were waking up to the news of a double murder on their doorstep. The focus of the investigation would be internal, looking into the dynamics of the Lee family and the mind of their young son. A significant part of the investigation, as Sheriff Cook noted, would involve a deep dive into Trevor Lee's background. Detectives would be examining his mental health history, looking for any signs of depression, anger issues, or other psychological conditions that might have contributed to his actions. They would also be speaking with his friends, teachers, and school counselors to build a picture of his life outside the home. Was he bullied? Did he show signs of distress? Were there any cries for help that were missed? These questions are vital to understanding the why behind this horrific act, moving beyond the simple what and how. The Clay County Sheriff's Office also issued a public appeal for information. They asked anyone who knew Trevor Lee or his parents to come forward with any details that might be relevant to the case. They provided a contact number 904-264-6512, hoping that someone in the community might hold a piece of the puzzle. This outreach acknowledges that crimes like this do not happen in a vacuum. There may have been subtle signs or previous incidents that, when viewed in hindsight, could shed light on the family's struggles. The investigation would be a comprehensive effort to understand not just the crime but the context in which it occurred. The news of the killing sent a ripple of grief and disbelief through Middleburg and the wider Clay County community. This is a place where people know their neighbors, where children play together, and where a sense of safety is part of the appeal. The violent deaths of David Lee and Brandy Smith and the arrest of their son shattered that sense of security. Neighbors were left stunned, struggling to reconcile the family they thought they knew with the horrific reality of the crime. They were left with a profound sense of sadness for the parents who lost their lives, and for the young boy, whose life is now forever defined by this tragedy. This case forces a difficult conversation about issues that are often hidden behind the closed doors of family homes. It raises questions about mental health support for young people, the impact of unresolved family conflict, and the accessibility of firearms in moments of crisis. It serves as a tragic reminder that even in seemingly normal families, deep-seated problems can exist. The community is now left to mourn, and to ask itself if there was anything that could have been done differently, any signs that were missed, or any resources that could have been offered to prevent such a devastating outcome. The lessons from this tragedy extend far beyond the borders of Clay County. It is a story that resonates with parents and families everywhere. It underscores the importance of open communication, of creating safe spaces for children to express their feelings, and of recognizing the warning signs of severe emotional distress. It also highlights the immense responsibility that comes with owning a firearm, particularly the need to ensure that weapons are stored securely and are inaccessible to children, especially during times of emotional turmoil. The Lee family's story is a worst-case scenario that serves as a powerful cautionary tale for all of us. In the end, this is a story with no winners, only losers. Two parents are dead, a young boy's future has been destroyed, and a community is left to grieve and search for answers. The case of Trevor Lee is a stark and painful reminder of the fragility of family life and the devastating consequences when things go terribly wrong. As the legal process unfolds, the focus must remain not just on punishment, but on understanding. By learning from this tragedy, we can hope to become more vigilant, more compassionate, and better equipped to prevent such a heartbreaking loss from ever happening again.